Hello, in this video tutorial, I will be talking about Unit 2, Activity 4, and we will be continuing with our reading of The Great Gatsby. So if I take a look at the announcement that I posted, um, Unit 3, Activity 4 deals with symbolism in The Great Gatsby. And we'll be talking about characters and objects that have deeper meanings, that they don't just represent a physical object or a specific person, but they maybe represent something greater. And F. Scott Fitzgerald, the author of The Great Gatsby, was very interested in symbolism. When he was writing the book, he used different images and different objects to mean something deeper. And that leads us back to the colors that hopefully you've been paying attention to throughout the first 6 chapters of the book, because you're going to have to submit an assignment for me this week where you show me examples of different colors in the book and how they're used, and then tell me what you think they symbolize. But if we get started here, if we just click on our link for Unit 3, Activity 4, and if we take a look here, see if I can make this a little bigger. All right, so the overall topic for this activity is symbolism. And so just to be clear, a symbol in literature can come in many forms. It can be a character, a place, an object. It can be in dialogue. It can be in what the characters are saying. But what we mean is a symbol goes beyond its literal meaning. So there used to be a short story that used to be really popular in grade 12 English that I used to read a lot with students called The Lottery. And you might have read The Lottery before because it's still very popular in English classes. And in that story, for example, there was a black box. And there was a black box that was very important to the story. But the black box had a deeper meaning than just a black box. So the black box had a purpose in the story. It had a job to do in the story. There was a reason that it was physically there. But then if you looked at it deeper, the black box had a symbolic meaning, had a deeper meaning. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in terms of The Great Gatsby. And one really powerful example is the green light that we keep hearing about. That's at the end of the pier on the Buchanan's property that Jay Gatsby keeps staring at, right? That green light, there's a reason that it's green, that it's not a yellow light or a red light or another color. There's a reason it's green. F. Scott Fitzgerald chose green on purpose. And so if we look a little deeper, we can find all sorts of locations and objects and ideas in the book that are symbolic. And so if we go down further here, first off, locations. And so it's important to remember a few of the locations that are talked a lot about in the book. So we've got East Egg, we've got West Egg, we've got the Valley of the Ashes, right? These three are very important neighborhoods, are very important locations in the book. And if you think about it, they all have very distinct, they all represent a different part of society. So like, for example, East Egg, where the Buchanans live, that represents old money. The families there generally have been rich for many, many years, many, many generations. Whereas West Egg, where Gatsby lives, is generally referred to as a neighborhood for new money, people that have recently become rich and have not had a family history of wealth. And so you have a clash in the book between East and West Egg, between old and new money. And then you also have the Valley of the Ashes, where essentially the poor and lower class live. And that neighborhood or that area represents a lower class, right? And so each neighborhood in the book has a specific part of society that they're representing. And so that's an example of locations symbolizing something or representing something more than themselves. You can also look at women in society. And I'll let you take a look at this and read this on your own. And there's some quotes in here that you want to consider. But you'll notice a lot of the times in this book, women are described in certain ways and their clothing is described in certain ways. And the argument is that F. Scott Fitzgerald is saying something about the position of women in society through symbolism, through their white dresses, through the words that he chooses when he describes them, right? And so I'd like you to take a look at this particular quote right here, and then it's further explained in the following paragraph, and see if you can identify certain words that are being used to describe women in the book that maybe have a deeper meaning. Okay, because the role of women in society is something that F. Scott Fitzgerald was very interested in. If we take a look, immorality and judgment, the giant glasses and the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg in the Valley of the Ashes. It's a we will see this billboard with these giant glasses advertising for an eye doctor. We saw it in earlier in the book in chapter 2, and you will see it again in chapter 7, which you'll be reading today. And I'd like you to consider, what do those eyes, those giant eyes on a billboard that are looking down at everything that is going on in the Valley of the Ashes, what could they symbolize? Why would F. Scott Fitzgerald put this billboard with giant eyes, looking down? I don't think that's an accident. I don't think. I think there's a reason that he's using a giant billboard with giant bespectacled glasses and eyes, and he's not using a billboard of a pizza restaurant, right? There's a meaning behind that. So I'd like to see if you can sort of read into that. Weather and seasons. If you look throughout the book, and there's going to be some examples in chapter 7 here, but there are previous examples in the book as well too, and I allude to them in your chapter questions. But when the weather or the seasons change, you'll notice that the mood in the book changes. For example, earlier in the book, and they discuss it right here. Earlier in the book, when Jay Gatsby meets Daisy in secret at Nick's, you'll notice that at the beginning of the meeting, it's pouring rain. And by the ending of the reading, the sun is out and the rain has completely gone away and dried up. I don't think that's by accident. I think F. Scott Fitzgerald is trying to say something has changed from the beginning of their meeting to the ending of their meeting. Things have gone from very rainy and very maybe, they maybe not very positive, and have changed to a more positive, more relaxed mood. He does this simply by changing the weather and changing the seasons throughout the story. So pay attention to that. And then, of course, last but not least is the colors. And hopefully you've been working on your Great Gatsby colors and symbolism chart. I'll open that up again in a minute. But the goal so far has been to jot down examples of objects, of people, of the clothing, anything that you see that is described using certain colors. And so if we take a look here again, I'll open it up. So far, hopefully, you have jotted down examples of objects or things that you see in the book that are white, gold, yellow, green, blue, and gray. So I gave you this chart before we started reading the book, when I was introducing the book in Unit 3, Activity 1. And so, again, I'm hoping that you already have examples of the different colors all the way up to chapter 6. And then this week, you're going to add examples for chapter 7 and then explain what do you think each color represents. So look back at all of the objects that you labeled as white and all of the objects that you labeled as gold and yellow and oops, sorry, and gray and blue and green. And at the bottom of each of the columns, in point form is fine, but just try to explain to me, what do you think that color symbolizes in the book? And there's not an exact right answer. Literary critics have discussed the colors in Great Gatsby for 100 years, and so there's not an exact right answer. But I want you to give me an explanation and to try to give it some thought and to tell me what you think each color represents or means. Like, why is that green light a green light? Why is Gatsby's car yellow, right? So when you go through everything that's yellow, everything that's green, etc., hopefully a pattern emerges and you have a good guess at what you think each color represents. Okay. Remember, you don't have to fill in every single box. Like maybe in chapter 2, there's nothing that's green, and that's fine, right? But you should have many of these boxes filled in. And so you should have a number of objects that you can look at and you can kind of say, well, what connects them all or what brings them together, and why do I think F. Scott Fitzgerald is having all of these things as blue? What do you think he means by that? I'll just give you one last kind of helpful example here. You might notice when you look over your yellow list, for example, that many things that relate to Jay Gatsby are yellow. And I find that interesting, and I wonder why you think that is. Okay. And so again, hopefully you can finish off this chart this week. If I go back to our activity page, I've given you a link here that you can click on. So if you'd like some help, this page is going to give you some theories and some ideas on what each of the colors in the Great Gatsby might mean. But ultimately, I would love your own opinion using your own words when you fill out the last row, when you tell me what you think each color symbolizes, because it's not an exact right answer. Okay. Other than that, you're reading chapter 7 this week, and you're answering chapter 7 questions. So if you click right here, you can make a copy of a Google Doc with your chapter questions. Remember, we're not submitting our chapter questions to me, but if you have any trouble with them, you can always let me know through email, or we can talk on Google Meet. The chapter questions will be very helpful, especially for the final exam, because Great Gatsby will be on the final exam. So you will be expected to remember, excuse me, you will be expected to remember key characters and events and locations. When you're done reading, of course, click on the assignment. Oh, come on. And if we take a look here, what you're doing in the assignment is you are just submitting your Great Gatsby colors and symbolism chart. So again, we just finished talking about that at the ending of the content. Hopefully you have the chart filled out at this point after reading chapter 7. So you're just going to click on the Dropbox, and submit it. And that's it for the week. I will say that chapter 7, this is the one time in this book where you're only reading one chapter this week. You usually are asked to read 2 chapters. That's because chapter 7 is the biggest chapter. So it is a bit longer than the other chapters, but it's also, I would argue, the most action-packed, and I think for many people, the best chapter of this book. Kind of all the conflicts come to a head in this chapter. So it's very important. Definitely read chapter 7 carefully and answer the chapter questions because, a lot of the most important events in the story happen in chapter 7. All right, that is about it. That's about all I have to say for Unit 3, Activity 4. If you have any questions, please send me an email. Remember, I can always meet with you on Google Meet and or in the classroom if you need help. All right, have a good week.